So I wanted to talk to you about social media in the elections that I look at. So there's Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And there's just too many slides, so I won't go through all of them. But the questions that I wanted to ask in my research was, how important was social media really to people in Southeast Asia during election time, and how do they use it, right? And I did focus heavily on Facebook at first because it's the most prominent platform across the country. But then something else came up that would probably prompt me to look further into chat apps. This, for those of you who don't know, this is Thanathorn Junawanrungit, who's the leader of the Future Forward Party in Thailand, which I'm more than happy to talk about because I just spent like 6 weeks interviewing their MPs. So it was the new political party in Thailand that grew out of military dictatorship, that managed to, with practically no funding, no resources, and about 4 weeks to campaign, to gain 6 million votes, right? And this party was targeting young people. So initially I thought it must have been a social media story, but it isn't completely, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. But I look at these 4 elections and I thought, so Southeast Asians that love selfies, love taking photos, they're online all the time. So what is it that they're really doing during election campaigns, right? And how does it matter in their voting decision? So I did a survey across all 4 countries, about 1,000 responded in each. And let's just look at what I find. So I only put the graphs up. I didn't include Thailand in most of my graphs, but there are findings from Thailand as well. So, there is Thailand here. Some of them don't have. So, most of the people who are actually on social media are young, actually educated. So, university degree, right? But they're mostly urban, which doesn't surprise people given the digital divide between rural and urban areas. And I didn't put here because Malaysia is an outlier, but they don't have that much money, right? So lower middle class, except for Malaysia because they're wealthier, right? So young people, not surprising. Urban people, not surprising. Educated, right? University degree, but they don't do that well income-wise, right? So these are the people who most actively engage on social media in these countries. What else? So income is sort of like, I had to put a separate category because Philippines is where you get the poorest people on social media, right? It becomes a bit, so then the rest is middle class, lower middle or middle, mostly in Indonesia, but it starts to skew down as you get wealthier. So in fact, this is now the preferable platform for people who young, urban, educated, and sort of lower middle class, right, in Southeast Asia. So then the other questions I was interested in was, did it matter what they did on social media to who they voted for, right? So this is the issue of influence, right? How much does social media influence your vote choice? So Philippines and Thailand, Facebook, very, very, very influential, right? It actually mattered to how they voted. But the important thing is that it's actually their friends and families on social media who influence that outcome. And that's interesting because you're thinking about friends and families and you think, don't you just talk to them? Face to face? These are close ties, right? Because you think about weak ties and close ties on social media. And you think, this should matter most, if social media is driving voting outcome, it should matter with the less close ties, right? Because if you're close ties, then your mom, you see her. So you don't really need social media as an intermediary to decide who to vote for. You just chat with her, or your dad, or your friends, close friends, right? It turned out not to be the case. And the Philippines is an outstanding one in this because obviously it has a very high population of overseas Filipino workers, right? Who of course are the financial capital of the family, right? So they, through social media, influence voting decision of their family members. But it also says something fundamental about social media, right? It actually doesn't weaken family ties in who to vote for, and that. In some ways, you think social media would, right? It would just make people more individualistic. They can think who they vote for without actually relying on their families and friends. We actually see that play out more in Malaysia, right? Where voters were behaving a lot more individualistic in the way they vote and didn't really look for family cues when deciding who to vote for. Malaysians were more educated. They go on social media to read on their own and decide more on their own about who to vote for. This was not the case in the Philippines or Thailand. Indonesia is sort of like in the middle, but again, families being highly influential in who they vote for. And by that, I mean, I asked the question, okay, was Facebook important to your vote choice? Yes. Who on Facebook influenced you in their voting choice? And they said families. And that says something about the power of social media is actually bringing the families together to make that kind of decision about who to vote for. Interesting thing, I thought. I didn't expect to find this. Then trust, right? So weirdly enough, Malaysians trust information on Facebook more. I just simply ask, do you trust information on Facebook, right? So sometimes it's sort of the majority of the response, and we don't get extremely critical, we don't really trust, obviously, because they're super active on social media, so you expect them to actually go there to look for information. So they probably, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. We see more trust in Malaysian case. But when you try to look for correlations, we find that those people who said that they really trust information on Facebook with regards to elections, there's actually a correlation between level of education and trust. So people who are less educated, who said that they trust information on Facebook more. So there seems to be that effect of, if you're less educated, you're more likely to trust information on Facebook, which does have implications when you're thinking about this information and information, right? Whereas income is not really a good predictor, and this is sort of, there's education at one level and income, and this says something about, I think, what young people are, what these societies are going through as well, right? Education and income are not always aligned when it comes to social media. Then I asked them about, and this is when we start to see divergence. What do you use Facebook for in relation to your support of a particular candidate, party, or coalition? And Facebook is overwhelmingly used for collecting information. And I don't have a separate graph here, but chat apps, so WhatsApp in the case of Indonesia and Malaysia, and Facebook Messenger in the case of Philippines. I didn't have a graph because they don't use the same apps. So chat apps is where it varies, right? So chat apps are encrypted apps. And in Southeast Asia, WhatsApp is dominant in Indonesia and Malaysia, whereas in the Philippines it's Facebook Messenger. So it's a messenger version of Facebook, and Thailand is Line. So there are already divergence on what they decide to use, right? Even though they could easily download WhatsApp or easily download Facebook Messenger, particularly because they already have Facebook Messenger. And its chat apps is where they use social media for mobilization in support of a candidate. So Facebook, we're using it for looking at stuff, information, gathering information for different candidates and parties. But to support candidates and parties, they actually use encrypted forms of communication, chat apps. And this also has another implication for disinformation, right? And I did like a small sample, but digital ethnography of line groups in Thailand, right? Because I found out that the military party that won unfairly and unfreely the election. Is this on record? It is on record. That's fine. Everybody knows. Whatever. They were really good at digital marketing online, as in the chat apps. And it's because when you market your campaign on chat apps, you don't bombard people with text. They just want to see like a photo and a very big letterhead, and that's it. That's all people look at. So there's no source. No one knows who made this image. No one even knows if the quotes are actually correct, but that's what people share. So the manner in which people share stuff about elections on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, chat apps really varies because of the way the platform's built. So in fact, political parties that could engineer, if they actually do it on their own and not outsource to PR campaigns, messaging chat apps, they need to just not have words and actually use a photo with a strong message. And this is what people share, which is then possibly leading to fake news, right? Because you don't have source, you don't even know if the quotes are true, but this is what people love to share. Because I've interviewed political parties that try to share actual policy stuff, like real substance, on these chat apps. It totally failed. It just didn't work. People were not sharing them. This is not what they wanted to see on chat apps. And that's really boring because in chat apps, they're not even connected like this is when you do groups of trusted friends, right? So the value of trust in information on those apps relies heavily on your close relationships with people in that group, right? Because you trust these people, you're in that chat app groups, and therefore you already believe these people, and therefore the message actually has legitimacy. It's not because it's actually got a source. So I'm going to stop here. But basically, I just wanted to end this. End this talk by saying too many slides. But I just want to end this talk by saying that social media matters a lot in how people in Southeast Asia vote, but it matters in different ways in different society. And it seems to be the case that the most mobilized people on social media in political terms in Southeast Asia are young, urban, educated, but not that wealthy, right? And the ways in which you market your political materials across different channels of social media varies. It's not all the same. So that's